Morning, everyone. As was noted at the beginning, my name is Mike Blackstone. I'm actually filling in for Mark Jones, who is the contracting officer for this tech office. He's homesick with the flu, picked up something from the kids. So I'm just going to fill in. So I'll just let you know that it won't be as fluid as I normally am. I'm going to be doing a lot of slide reading to make sure I don't miss points that Mark would have gone over. You took the time to come here. I want to make sure you don't leave not knowing the little nuggets that you should know. If I miss anything that's important, Rob's here in the front. He'll throw something at me and make sure I go back and make a point. So, just to, some of this stuff, you guys are all technical folks, so sometimes folks tend to nod off asleep and whatnot during the contracting guide presentation. So, just to let you know, there are important nuggets in here. And the reason that they're important is that a lot of folks will propose, and a small group will get selected. So we want to make sure that the reason you do not get selected, if that's what happens, is because of what you proposed and not because of how you proposed. So it's important, some of these things that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to use my slides so I don't miss anything. So we use the BAA process here. You've all found your way to it, so you know what it is. It's DARPA's bread and butter in terms of solicitation type. It's a very easy process in case you feel like reading Part 35. It's a good short read. If you're going to read anything in the FAR, that'd be the place you go. It's like a half a page long in terms of how we run the selection how we run the solicitation process for broad agency announcements. That gives all of the power in this process, for the most part, to the PM, the DARPA PM, which is where it belongs. We post them to FedBizOps, grants.gov. We have closing time, which you guys have seen. An important note to make there is the due date and time is the due date and time. There is no review of late proposals. So if you're late, you're late. And no matter what the excuse is, in most instances, most PCOs have a small tolerance for listening to those stories. So please make sure you get those things in on time. What's in the BAA is everything you need to know in terms of solicitation procedures. So read that thing and follow it. Everything's there that you need to have. And then what we do from an evaluation perspective is we follow a scientific review process. So like I said, it is less bureaucratic, less litigious than most processes, and puts the power and responsibility in the program manager's hand. So you guys saw some of this before, so I won't beat it up, but so you have your 5 technical areas. What's important here is that you can propose to multiple technical areas. You're not prohibited from doing that. However, that due to the nature of the work, what you guys actually saw in one of the slides there, the 5 areas, that when you are combining certain technical areas, there are a certain set of ground rules in terms of how you combine those things. And those ground rules are laid out on the second bullet there. There should be no other combination of TAs attempted in a single proposal. And we also want to make sure that, that you don't submit multiple proposals in the same technical area. As a prime, you stick to only submitting once for a particular technical area. So the reason for that is, as you saw in one of the PM slides, is that there are a couple of areas, technical areas, where there are conflicts in terms of the roles of what the performer is going to be doing. So we need to make sure that we sort of keep a separation of church and state going there in terms of TA1 and TA5. Those roles have to sort of be independent from the other 3 technical areas. So that's how you kind of get the grouping that you see there. Okay, so for this particular BAA, we're not laying in the solicitation what amounts are available for any technical area or for the program as a whole. You guys are going to be selected based on the merits of your proposal, what you guys have to offer to the program manager. And then he'll obviously have limits in terms of a budget, and he'll have to eventually put together teams that he feels satisfies the program goals and objectives. For this particular solicitation, there will be no grants that will be proposed or selected. So there are going to be procurement contracts, FAR-based contracts, and cooperative agreements, and 845 other transactions. Usually in our BAA, I'm not sure if it's in this one, but if not, on the DARPA CMO website, if you don't know what an 845 prototype is, there's some background information on what that is and how you use them. Okay, so eligibility issues. So everyone is free to propose as prime or sub. There really are no restrictions, at least none that are placed on you based on the solicitation terms and conditions. Obviously, if you're a foreign organization or individual, there are rules that you have to be aware of on your side of the fence. in terms of how you propose and then even how you control information. Export control is a good example. That is not something that DARPA is heaping on you. That is something that is DoD-wide, actually U.S. government-wide. Those are responsibilities that you guys have to be aware of. So anyone can propose. For FFRDCs and government entities, there are a certain set of ground rules that those organizations have to follow. They're there, they're in the BAA. So on this bullet, if you're an FFRDC, for example, you have a sponsoring organization that your contract's in place with. One of the things that you'll see in the solicitation is that you have to get approval from that sponsoring organization to actually be on one of the teams that are soliciting against, or that are proposing against the solicitation. So you'll see that bullet a little bit later on as well, that there are responsibilities if you're one of those organizations to make sure that you meet those requirements and that you have approval from your sponsoring organization. Conflicts of interest are an important topic, of course. You need to make sure that you discuss those issues to the degree that they're relevant to your proposal, your situation. In your proposal, if you fail to do so, your proposal actually can be rejected without any evaluation whatsoever. That's how serious DARPA is on making sure that there are no conflicts going on. So you're also responsible if you are an organization, an individual, an entity that in any way currently supplies CETA support to DARPA. That's also very important to us. We very much keep those things separated. Our CETAs do the CETA work, our performers do the performer work. So if you think you're an organization that is attempting to sort of run on both sides of the fence, you need to talk about that in your proposal. And what I would highly recommend is that you actually send an email to the BAA box right away and get us involved in possibly discussing through that situation to make sure that you're not spending time writing a proposal for something that we're just going to toss out on a technicality. Okay, some proposal preparation stuff. So probably all things you guys have seen before in submitting proposals against our solicitations. There are 2 volumes, technical and a cost. There are page limits by section for the technical. An important point is there are no page limits for cost. There's a reason for that. You traditionally cannot give us too much cost information. Most contracting officers will tell you that. I revel in that information. You can swim around it all day long, like I'm sure the program manager can swim around in the technical stuff. It's important information. So there's no page limit for a reason. So let me just go to the next page. So this kind of lays out what the page limitations are on the technical proposal side. And just as a clarification, so you can see as you start to group multiple technical areas, the number of pages that you have available to you to write are steadily increasing. And where you see in management, it really should just be 10 across the board. So the point is that no matter what you're grouping of technical areas, you're going to get 10 pages to write your right to management issues. And then you have your appendices. Appendix A is mandatory, Appendix B is optional. Rob, what are those appendices?
Rob Simmons. The appendices are, Appendix A regards, we ask for more background information. We make them give us, in regards to OCI information, tell us exactly who their team members are. Appendix B is optional, where they can put in information for resumes, other background information.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let me make sure I haven't missed anything on this page. Let's see here. So on the couple points on the bottom there is just to make sure that you address everything that's required of you in the BAA. Make sure that every section that's laid out in the BAA is discussed in some fashion or another, which may be at a minimum. If it's not relevant to you, like animal use, you don't have any OCI issues, just make sure that you put none. Sometimes it not being discussed or blank leads us to believe that you actually forgot to submit information, and we want to make sure that we're not in that situation. Cost proposal volume, like I said, it's important to me. On the presentations that I normally give for MTO, I have like a good 4 slides just on the cost proposal. But an important point here is to make sure that you have a spreadsheet, a working spreadsheet, which means actual formulas in there so that we can actually see how cost proposals are built up. That's important. As we go through the technical volumes and the statements of work, we want to make sure that we understand the logic, and sometimes that logic can be discerned from just looking at the formulas in those spreadsheets. So a spreadsheet isn't a spreadsheet if you're just sort of PDFing it and locking us out from actually seeing how that thing is actually working in the background. So as a contracting officer, I can tell you that's really very important. That helps us also reduce the amount of time that it takes us to negotiate if you're fortunate enough to be selected, and everybody, once they get the selection letter, is staring at the contracting officers and hoping that we can shorten the amount of time it takes to get your awards. Those are the kind of little things that help do that. Okay, government rights, or data rights. So this is an important issue. There's a format that's laid out in the BAA for how you communicate these things. So the best possible outcome for the government in most situations is that is either nothing listed in there, which means the government gets unlimited rights to everything. That guarantees us, in most cases, there will be no barriers to transition. But that's not always the case, and having restrictions is not necessarily a bad thing. What's important is that you identify software and data that you intend to deliver to the government under this program with anything less than unlimited rights, which could mean something like government purpose rights, which is perfectly okay. That is where the government sort of shares the rights with the contractor for a certain period of time before they flip over to unlimited. So for this one, you just want to make sure there are goals and objectives to this program, and we want to make sure that anything you do identify in there with restrictions, that they are mapping and at least being sensitive to those goals and objectives. So when you fill out this form and you identify those items of data and software, what's important is what information you put in there about them, how they're going to be used, what importance they have to the program, what your plan is in terms of ensuring that those things aren't a transition barrier and that would in some way prevent us from doing the things that we ultimately want out of this program. So those are your responsibilities to make sure if you have those items identified, you have to explain to us what they're about and that you understand that we understand that there's no barriers being created by those items. Like I said, it's not bad, it's not perceived as being bad to have them. It just can be a bad thing if you list them and we don't understand what their value is. Okay, so you heard mention of the ACAs, Associate Contractor Agreements. So this program is not competitive in nature in terms of the various teams that are going to be taking care of various technical areas. It is actually very dependent on there being cooperation amongst the various teams who will be operating under separate contracting instruments. So one of the ways that we make sure that we don't just luck out and that everybody plays nice and making sure that there's an information flow and that people are playing nice is that we put ACAs in place. So if you don't know what an ACA is, it's actually a legal instrument that is between the performers. So the government doesn't get involved in negotiating that instrument, and we're not a signatory to that document either. There's going to be language in the BAA, there will be language built into a clause in your resulting award instruments that will tell you what those things are about and generally the kinds of things that have to be dealt with in those agreements. But ultimately, it's going to be the responsibility of each of the selected teams, once you're all identified who's who, to actually go through and start negotiating those things. And they'll have all kinds of things, roles and responsibilities, who's flowing what information in each direction. It'll have language about roles or responsibilities regarding data rights and intellectual property. As you guys start passing information back and forth, that becomes an issue. Those are the types of things that get laid out. It takes some time to put those things together. So you have to make sure that you start that process as soon as possible. So once your selection letters go out, there will be a certain period of time in which the contracting officer that will be negotiating the awards will sort of work through the negotiation process. So it won't be right when you get that selection letter that you're going to get sort of a matrix of performers so that you can go out and start contacting. But shortly after the negotiation process starts, when the contracting officer is confident that the folks that have been selected are the folks that are going to go through negotiation and get an award, you'll get notified of who all the performers are, and then the legal offices will be responsible for going out and negotiating those agreements. The point being that we want those agreements in place by the kickoff so that you can actually show up to the kickoff. All right, so some items to note. I'm not going to belabor the first piece. There's all kinds of things in the tail end of that solicitation that you need to pay attention to in terms of the systems we use, responsibilities that you're going to eventually see float into your contracts. Things like IEDISON, wide area workflow, most of you should be pretty aware of. I will hit on the subcontracting issues. If you're a large business, you have a responsibility to submit a subcontracting plan as part of your submission. And also an important point, and it gets dropped a lot, there's only so much time to put the proposals together. And that's the subcontract cost proposal. So you have a responsibility, if you have subcontractors, that you are gathering up subcontract proposals, legitimate proposals, not rough orders of magnitudes, not letters that say that I'm a team member, but an actual proposal that is built up in the same format that you as a prime are putting together, same rules that are in that solicitation apply to subs, is that you need to make sure that you have that in your submission. In most instances, the subs aren't going to want you submitting a version that has proprietary information, rates, and factors. You probably aren't going to get that, but you'll get sort of a non-proprietary version, and that's what you're going to include in your submission. If you're selected, then the contracting officer during the fact-finding session will probably go out to the subs and get the version that has the proprietary information so that we can do our normal analysis of rates, factors, those kinds of things. If you're utilizing an FFRDC or government entity, like I mentioned, there's responsibilities, there's documents, things you have to say that need to be included in that proposal, like the sponsor approval letter that an FFRDC would have to place in there. We ask for that the validity period for the proposals be a minimum of 120 days. There's a lot of efficiencies in the BAA process, but we get a lot of proposals in most cases in response to these solicitations. So it takes a lot of time for us to go through the selection process, and then after that, to actually go through a negotiation process. So there's a lot of things that have to be done. So we usually ask for a minimum of 120 days. Like I said before, if you suspect there's a conflict of interest issue of any type, the best advice I can give is you contact us as soon as possible. Don't wait to mention it in the proposal if you're not sure about it. Don't ignore it, of course. Send something into the email box, and a contracting officer will contact you, and we can work through it, tell you whether it's an issue or not, and how best to prepare or to present it in your proposal. The document types that cause us the least amount of trouble are listed there, so make sure that you use those formats. Like I mentioned, for spreadsheets, prefer not to have those PDF if possible, because then we can't read them, or at least the formulas in them. And of course, we like the proposals in English, and I believe with dollars as well. I've received a few that actually had pounds instead of dollars. So, okay, proposal submission. So I think for this program, all proposals are expected to be unclassified. We don't want any that are classified. So the whole program's not set up for that, and even the tools that we use for submission of the proposals are not set up for that as well. So we follow the procedures in the BAA. Do not submit proposals except as outlined in the BAA. That's obvious. No emails, no faxes. If you're doing an assistance instrument, which would be the cooperative agreements, then you use grants.gov. For everything else, you use the DARPA ITO web-based upload system. So those are your rules. So the only folks who don't use the web-based system, the I2O system, are the folks who are submitting for cooperative agreements. Last point, couldn't say it enough times. Believe me, it sounds silly saying it multiple times, but I've done hundreds of BAAs in the 11 years that I've been at DARPA, and a lot of times you get somebody who's 10 minutes late or 15 minutes late, and it kills me to watch that because you spent a lot of time to write those proposals. And I don't want to see somebody who has possibly the next internet kind of thing being not selected or not reviewed because of some technicality like the deadline. So please don't miss the deadlines. Okay, evaluation and award. There's no common statement of work. We give you guys a problem set in the solicitation. Your job is to write a proposal that has a solution to that problem set, and part of that is writing your statement of work. So you're going to lay out your tasks by phase, by technical area. There's instructions in the solicitation how to lay that out. As a contract officer, I will tell you, please put time into that document for two reasons. One, it's just another way to ensure the government understands what it is that you are proposing, because they are going to be mapping that statement of work to what you say in your technical proposal, to what you say in your cost proposal. Those things should match. Also, that document is one of the few documents that are in the proposal that find their way into the award instrument. So the statement of work is physically attached to your award instrument if you're getting a FAR-based contract or an OT. Depending on the contracting agent, that may or may not be the case if you're receiving a cooperative agreement. But at the very least, it'll be referenced. So make sure you put time into those things. Evaluation criteria, there's just 3 of those. They're listed in order of importance, and they're sort of broad in that way for a reason, to allow maximum flexibility for the evaluation team to work their way through those proposals. Like I said, scientific review process is how we actually go through that. There's going to be a panel of experts, government. There will also be CETAs that are locked down by NDAs that help us work through that process. Sometimes the subject matter experts to make sure that we understand proposals as clearly as we should before we make decisions. Another important point is with BAAs is that we can award some, we can award all, we can award none, we can award parts of a proposal. This is one of those solicitation types we can slice and dice what you actually submit. So in cases where you might submit multiple technical areas, if the PM wants to, and it makes sense, you can actually separate out a technical area that is a strength in the way that you propose from one that maybe is not a strength in what you proposed, and just partially select that area that is a strength for you. So just understand that don't be surprised if you get a selection letter that looks like that. That is something that we do. Communication. So I'll run through this real quick. It's a fairly open process at the beginning. So in this process right now, so prior to receipt of proposals, fairly open, lots of open communication. The one thing that we tell the program managers, and we want you guys to know as well, is that although you can have these kinds of conversations, we do not want any passing of technical information, something that the PM learns from one conversation being sort of communicated to somebody else in another conversation. So that as a program manager's responsibility, that we should be aware of, that we don't sort of transfer the technology in those conversations. After we get the proposals in, things start to clamp down as you work your way down through the slide. So when the proposals come in, we have sort of what we call a clarification process. So at that point, the communications will be basically us going back to you if we don't necessarily understand a concept that's being discussed. If we see a conflict between cost and technical, we'll go back and ask clarifying questions. The one ground rule there is that we can't ask you anything where the only way you can respond is by changing your proposal. You cannot change your proposal during that process. That would actually be negotiations. We typically do not do those in the BAA process. So after selection but prior to award, at that point most of your communications are going to be with the contracting officer and also the Corps, and there'll be discussions as well with the PM, but the folks you'll hear from most are going to be the contracting officer and the Corps. Usually the Corps you hear from in terms of technical issues like trying to finalize the statement of work, and of course you should know that the contracting officer has got to deal with the negotiations, the terms and conditions, and the cost of the contract. Everyone is allowed, if you so request, an informal feedback session after you receive your selection letter. That's whether you were selected or not. Those are sort of very informal, as the name says, kind of process. They're not structured in a way to be anything less than the PI and the PM going through strengths and weaknesses to make sure that since you spent the time writing a proposal that you at least understand what the PM was thinking if you weren't selected, the things that maybe concerned him, the areas of risk that hadn't been addressed, those types of things. They are usually 15 minutes in length at most. If they drag on longer than that, then you're usually getting to things that you don't need to get into. The other point is only the contracting officer can obligate the government. So after selection, no matter what conversations you may be privy to between the PM or the Corps or anyone else in the government, you don't act, you don't incur expenses, you don't go off and work unless you are authorized to do so by the contracting officer. So, depending on who the contracting officer is, most of us are fairly tightly wound. In my instance, I would have absolutely no mercy on someone who goes off and spends money without authorization. That's your own fault if you do that, and I will not allow you to recover those costs from the resulting contract, and most PCOs will not. So just hold tight when you receive your selection letter, get to the negotiation process, and when you receive your contract, that's when you can start. So, some takeaways. Submit the proposal before the due date and time. Don't wait until the last minute. Some of these are submitted through these systems like grants.gov. The systems can't always be trusted to behave like they're supposed to behave. You wait 20 minutes before. You're taking your chances that that thing's not down. It's got lots of traffic. Those things are your responsibility. So you have to make sure you give yourself time to make sure those systems do what they're supposed to do. Read and understand the BAA. Like I said, working spreadsheets. Establish multiple accounts if you're submitting multiple contracts or OTs. That's especially true of the ITO submission tool. And like I said, contracting officer is the only one that can allow you to start work and to start incurring costs. There you go. Thank you very much.